Well, Mandela's hospitalisation coincides with the 49th anniversary of his sentencing to life in prison in the infamous Rivonia trial. A year earlier, he was among several liberation fighters arrested during a raid on the Lillieslief farm in Johannesburg. Joining us now for more insight is Nicholas Wolpe, CEO of the Lillieslief Trust. Thanks very much for coming in to speak to us, Nicholas. I mean, the significance of Lillieslief farm we know cannot be overstated, but at times like the present, when the nation is so intently focused on Nelson Mandela, do you feel this location takes on a special significance?
I think it does. I think the reason why it takes on such a significance, I think the health of Nelson Mandela brings home the fragile connection that exists to the past in terms of that group of individuals that played a key and fundamental role in the liberation struggle. Their numbers are slowly falling, and he, amongst a few others, are the last connection to that period, and Lillieslief will enable that connection to remain in the hearts, mind and consciousness of all South Africans.
There's such a body of information about South Africa's liberation struggle. What do you say to born-frees or foreigners or even South Africans who simply don't know the history of our country about the significance of Lillieslief farm?
I mean, it is a frightening thought that particularly the born-frees are not aware of the sacrifices, are not aware of the struggle. I mean, we're all aware that Nelson spent 27 years in prison, along with people like Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Ahmed Kathada and Dennis Goldberg. And it's frightening to think that they are really not aware of the sacrifices that were endured, the sacrifices that they were willing to expose themselves to bring about a new South Africa. And I think the importance of Lillieslief, not just as a historical site, but as a place of memory, will ensure that that story of that particular period and beyond, because of its connection to the Rivonia trial, remains fresh in the minds and what I'd like to call in the consciousness of all South Africans, in that DNA.
We may revere this as a site of our history now, but going back to the day of that raid, it must have been a terrifying moment for the men caught there.
Well, it was. I mean, in an interview that Dennis Goldberg gives, he says it became a cold day. Not the fact that it was just in winter, it became a cold day in terms of the realization that it had just sunk in, that the security force or the police had raided the place and had arrested them, because the irony is that that was to be the last final meeting to take place at Lillieslief. In fact, there was fear that the place had been exposed, and at a meeting on July the 6th, there was heated discussions as to whether they should meet at Lillieslief again, but unfortunately there was no alternative meeting place available.
This farm has been turned into a wonderful museum, which you have a part in running. What's the public response been to visiting this establishment?
Well, I think there's been, I would say, three very distinct responses. One response is the surprise of the number of whites involved in the liberation struggle, because it is not generally known that whites played an active role in the liberation struggle. So that has been a response of surprise by the public. The second response has been the interactivity, the nature of how we have presented the information, how it is communicated, and the way that we have communicated it, because we've tried to communicate it in a manner which is immersive, dynamic, and enlightening. And the third response has been that they have been bowled over by the amount of information, and information that is generally that people are not aware of, and it has taken them by surprise.
Nicholas, places, as you alluded to earlier, don't enjoy the kind of or they do enjoy the kind of longevity, rather, that human beings don't. What would you say to a South African who says, well, history is not really my thing, especially liberation history, which is so harsh? Why should I visit Lillieslief farm?
Well, I think the important thing to understand is that history is a fundamental part of who we are as South Africans. Not just South Africans, every country in the world. Their modus operandi, for want of a better word, their identity, a sense of who they are, a sense of being, is couched and related directly to the history of their country, whether that is in South Africa's case, the liberation struggle, or any other form of history. It is an important part of who we are and what we are and where we are going and where we would like to go.
Nicholas Wolpe, very good talking to you. Thanks
My
for your
pleasure.
time.
Thank you for having me.
News that moves. eNCA.com.